What's up, guys? It's Wick um, with a new video out. Sorry for the little pause in doing videos. I've been a little busy with All Stars. On a side note, I do plan on doing a video on how awful that last round was. Shame on EVONY for calling this their premier event and never being able to set it off without a hitch. You know, people work towards getting there, to getting those dragons, and lo and behold, it's just full of glitches. But that's a side note. This video is going to be about the actual intrinsic traits video on the battle mechanics, the second video. I got some very interesting feedback from saying he watched the video and he's like, you didn't really actually go into the intrinsic traits and how they interact. And he was right. I watched the video. I'm like, man, I just went right to that 30 billion zeroing. I think I got a little too excited to show that off, but the little egg in my face, I never actually went through how HP works, defense works, and attack works. And a big shout out to the big breakthrough on this for me was through Derrick's video, aka Zoo on C4 Discord. I'll try to link his video here if I can. But that was kind of the breakthrough, the equation I did too, and I'll get to that. So also as a correction to my buffs video, when describing and discussing flats versus percentages, a lot of you noticed that I did make the mistake of using the buffed numbers on my rally spot, not the base numbers, because the base numbers are much lower than mine were, which actually skews utility way over to flats over percentages. However, I think a lot of you guys were misunderstanding my conclusions. A lot of people think I'm all flats. I'm not. I definitely mix in flats a lot, but I definitely think percentages have a place to be used. And I think I've been really excited about some of the feedback. A lot of guys have given back. They said, for instance, one guy out there said, hey, you know what? Nobody ever debuffs fully ground attack. Is that one you think a percentage buff should be used? And that's exactly what I do, and exactly the kind of thinking I love to see these videos spur on, where people are thinking by themselves. Also, as a quick aside, listen, I appreciate all the love. I appreciate a lot of guys asking me questions. I appreciate you think that I'm the guy to ask, but a lot of the guys are asking, hey, what's the best defensive build? I'll do a video on that, sort of, but that's like asking what your favorite ice cream is. Everybody, that's how this game is made yours, is deciding which troop you want to go for, which defense you want to build, and what you want to protect against, and what you're going to see in Shalons, Battlefields, and All-Stars. They do differ. So different people are built differently. And again, I think your power size dictates a lot of how your defense is going to go, because it dictates what kind of rallies you're going to see. So it's important to understand that that's not something I'm really interested in doing for you guys, not because I'm above it. I am a very busy surgeon. I don't have a lot of time to do a lot of that stuff. But more so, it's like I said, I feel like it's robbing you of your opportunity to put your personal stamp on the game. Make this game yours. That's how you make this game yours. The purpose of these videos isn't so that you ask me. It's so that you figure it out on your own and you decide, hey, you know what? That resonates with me. That's something I want to do. Or I disagree, or I want to be able to prepare against that Wick would do, and be able to counter that. So again, the purpose of this is to make the game more competitive, not to make it homogenous. So please, take this information and go through it, make it yours, decide what you want to do with your keep. And again, we'll have talks about it. One other thing I really thought about doing was actually trying to get a panel, like a live discussion panel with some of the bigs in the game. Hoping maybe I can talk Sing into it, a couple other RSP players into it, a couple of the big players on the different continents into like a live streaming panel. Maybe I can organize that. If you guys are interested in that, or something you guys think you'd like, just throw it in the comments, and I think maybe we can get something like even a podcast or a Twitch stream. I don't know, whatever. But anyway, let's get back to this video. So in terms of the base stats, these are the base stats for T14. And it's important to understand the relationship still maintains about which one's, the tank, which is ground with the big HP. The mouth is the big attack, the highest attack. Siege is the biggest range and uses extrinsic range to its advantage. And Archer's kind of an all-arounder with some range in there and good, strong strength on attack as well. So knowing these numbers, how do they interact? That's the real question. What do you need to decide what to buff when you're preparing for what? And that's what I want to get to at the end of this video. Let's pretend, and let's just do what we usually do, and do an example. And an example is one archer versus one ground, no general, And let's ignore the extrinsic trait video. Let's ignore range. Let's ignore speed. Let's pretend that they're all toe-to-toe. And you have an attack, you have an HP, you have defense. And you have a ground troop against an archer troop, and they're toe-to-toe. There's no distance, there's no ground troop whiffing, there's none of that. The ground troop has a monster HP. The range troop has the ground troop edged a little bit on attack, but the ground troop also has the range troop, archer troop, strongly outdone on defense. And how does that come into play? And that was the thing I was stuck with until I found Derrick's video. So for me, the best way the easiest way I think about it, and I know this is a little bit hokey and maybe a little goofy, but again, I think a lot of you will continue to remember it this way. If anybody's ever played a PvP game with like two fighters, like Street Fighter, that's how old I am, Tekken, any of those like fighting games, Marvel versus Capcom, there's a little HP gauge at the top of the screen. And I wrote it in here as a little red bar. And the HP gauge dictates when it gets to 0, your player is dead. The easiest way to think of HP is your battery, your energy, your life force, whatever way you want to, but it is a measure of what you have to take away until kill that troop. The HP has a huge tank at 24,260. The HP of the archer is roughly 40% of the ground troops HP, so the bar starts a lot shorter. So if you notice, I made the ground troops bar really long, archer's troop is a lot shorter, and that's where they start. So already the HP of the archer being so low, it has to take fewer hits, assuming things are equal, to die. And that's why, one of the reasons why, whenever you have a ground army versus a ranged army, it's a bloodbath. However, because their attacks are so similar, but attacks are weaker with ground, what's really interesting and the thing that I couldn't break through on was this, the defense. How does the defense equal into or affect that attack? Obviously, what I could get to was that you can't figure out exactly the damage until you know what defense does to that number. I know that there's a hit that comes from ranged and decreases the HP gauge here on the ground guy. If you see that little hit and the little left arrow, it drops it on a certain number, just like in those fighting games. It takes a hit, the HP drops, gets closer to 0 and gets closer to dying. Same thing goes for the range guy. Hit, he comes down, but how much exactly is that damage? So what I could figure out, and how far I got before I got to Derrick's video, was that obviously attack goes up, damage goes up. If defense goes up, damage goes down. So damage is, the defense is directly inversely proportional. Again, this is math, right? Basic maths, that's what this game is all about. Inversely proportional to the damage you take. And attack is directly proportional to the damage you take. But how? How much does it affect and how does it affect? Well, it wasn't until I got to this screen, which is directly borrowed from Derrick. Derrick, I hope you don't mind me taking the liberty of copying it, because I do plan on linking your video here. And this is the equation he came up with, which seemed pretty damn accurate, according to his calculations of what the damage does exactly. And again, this is Derrick's video. Now, the N is the number of troops. That's obvious. More troops you have, more damage you do. Easy. A is attack. K is a troop modifier. I don't want to go into that here because it is pretty esoteric. I think it's lost on a lot of people, and I think it's an insider number that the EVONY uses to modify the outcomes of battle. And if they find that one troop, personally, I think the utility of it is that they find that one troop gains too much of an advantage, it's the handicap. I think it handicaps some troops. It gives some troops a little extra boost to make them more relevant. That's their little fudge factor. That's the K. I don't want to go too far into that because it's a constant. It's a factor that relies to everybody. So it doesn't exactly affect how much the defense is going to affect. Totally, it might a little bit. But again, when you're choosing which buffs to do and who to buff on your defenses for the gear, I think that whether it's going to be flat or percentage or which troop on your wall general is going to be, I think a lot of you have to understand the interplay of these numbers. So if you get rid of the N, the number of troops, which we can, we can correct for and kind of nullify here on this example being one troop versus one troop, and we ignore the K, you actually end up with an attack times the ratio of attack of the attacker over attack of the attacker plus the defense of the defender. So that A times A over A plus D. And that ratio, this ratio, is the big crazy one. That really was the breakthrough for me. Thanks again, Derrick. This A over A plus D, that's attack of the attacker over the attack of the attacker plus defense of the defender, is when it comes down to it and math, right? D is the defender's defense, A is attacker's attack. So that's A over A plus D. When you see it and you do a mind experiment, and this is just saying, okay, let's take 4 scenarios. Let's take high attack, high defense, high attack, low defense, low attack, high defense, low attack, low defense, and see what ratios we get. Now, I don't want to get specific to the troops yet, but I just want people to conceptualize what happens in these scenarios. And you have the equation on the left side, right? A over A plus D. And then this is all multiplied. You get a ratio, and that's multiplied times the attacker's attack. Essentially, it's the handicap. How much weaker does the attack get? If you have scenario number 1 in black across the top, and I'm going to say just for a high number, I just picked 100, and low, I picked 1. Now, it's important to note that in actual numbers of the actual base stats here, right, you're looking at actual ratios that the highest attack to the lowest attack is roughly double, right? So it's like 2 to 1. But the HP, the highest HP to the lowest HP is roughly 8 times, right? And the defense is roughly going to be 6 to 7 times. So the 100 number isn't really realistic, but again, I'm just being illustrative here to help you understand how these numbers affect the outcome. So on this example here, right, let's take number 1. You have a troop with a high attack hitting a troop with a high defense. Both of them have, let's say those numbers are 100. 100 over 200, 1/2 is about 50% of attack strength. So if your attack on that troop is 5,000, you're actually doing 2,500 of damage. You understand how that reads? So again, high attack, high defense means you're able to have and make a serious dent into the damage done. High attack, low defense, right? That's as if I just told you that without even reading the equation. If somebody has a high attack and the other person has a low defense, it's a bloodbath, right? That's going to do a lot of damage. So 100 over 100 plus 1 is 100 over 101, which is 99% attack strength, 99.1%, right? So it's a big deal to actually have that high attack, low defense. It means that I can put as much defense buff on that guy as possible. It's not really going to affect the attack damage. Low attack, high defense. That's interesting. 1 over 100 plus 1, or 1 plus 100, is 1 over 101, is about 1% attack strength. Again, here, putting more defense on this scenario doesn't really help, right? It's unnecessary to buff this person's defense. You're going to make the attack go from what, 1% to 0.6%? What's the difference? Still a bloodbath on defense, right? So that's third scenario favors defense. Second scenario favors attacker. First scenario means that buff wars are going to play out. The buffs are going to determine the outcome of that battle. And fourth scenario, low attack and low defense, look what you get. 1 over 1 plus 1 is 1/2, 50% attack strength. Here, that the absolute number of defense, right? Let's just say that you can buff defense 4 points. The guy on the bottom, you're going to go 1 over 1 plus 5 is 1 over 6 is a 16% attack strength. That's a big difference in the damage done to that troop. So whenever there's low attack and low defense, that's actually where you're going to get the biggest change in the outcome of that battle. The first one, right? High attack, high defense. If I only have four points to add to that buff, it's 100 over 100 plus 104. Is still roughly 1/2. You're making minimal difference. You have to get a much bigger buff with a much bigger defense to make a difference in that outcome. This is also why whenever you're refining, you're seeing massive numbers for Sutton troops, right? Ground troops numbers, the flat numbers, the flat max numbers are much higher than siege, which has a very low defense, because the ground is number 1, right? And the siege is number 4. So when you see those numbers change, it's not supposed to be homogeneous. It's because those troops, you get a much bigger kick out of a much smaller number. Now, let's actually go through, right? Again, the same equation, same numbers. Sorry, that's double slide, but this is what I want to show you. What do these actual scenarios represent? High attack, let's say number one. High attack versus high defense. Well, which troops got the highest attack? Mount. Which troops got the highest defense? Ground. With the highest HP, mind you. So mount attacking ground is similar to number one. So buffing ground defense will help it outlast mount, right? Might get you a bigger attack, might really drop that big attack down a little bit, and the buff wars are going to play out. Next one, right? Number two, high attack, low defense. What is that? What scenario is that? Well, that's mount attacking siege, right? So you can buff the siege's defense all you want. You're going to go from 99 to 97%. So defense buffs for siege aren't going to really help you much against the mount attack. Number three, low attack, high defense. That's a siege versus a ground troop. Has anybody ever heard of a siege troop killing a ground troop? Not really. Maybe it was a severe buff mismatch, but it's not normal supposed to happen. That's usually when your biggest bloodbaths happen on the ground troop attack against siege. So here you can buff defense for siege. It's not going to do much, right, for the siege killing if you're attacking ground. Siege attacking siege. This is the other one, low attack, low defense. You get a big hit in terms of affecting the attack strength by buffing their defense. So what's also interesting and important to notice, by the way, on that first slide, sorry to slide back on you here, what do you notice about siege here? It's the only troop whose base troop attack is equivalent to its base troop HP. In other words, one siege, if you put two sieges on a battlefield and they both launch simultaneously, it's a double KO if they're not buffed. The siege, because the HP is so low and the attack is so high compared to its HP, is the one that HP and attack buffs can really alter the outcomes as well as defense. So again, really important, right? And if you notice, defense is exactly half. These numbers are not accidental. These are done mathematically to be able to simulate battles so that actually siege does come into play. So let's go back to that slide, right? And you have these examples, right? Mount attacking siege, siege attacking ground, siege attacking siege. And if you look at these all, let's move back to my first example of ground versus ranged. We have the base numbers up top, and I'm using my little Street Fighter analogy for the HP. The ground troops about 60%, it's about a 60% reduction from ground into ranged HP. So the HP is starting at about 40% of what that ground troop has. So the little bar over that little ranged troop is really short, 40% of what the ground troop bar is. And if we use our equation here, right, using, let's start with ranged. The attack is 4690, again, sorry about the handwriting. The defense is 11760. The actual damage on a ground troop by a ranged troop per turn is 1,337 damage. If your HP tank for the ground troop is 24,000, yeah, that's a lot of turns you're going to need to kill that ground troop, right, at the base level. A lot, right? So, more like, I think it's about 15 or 16 turns. That's a lot of turns. The ground troop's going to do 2233 damage per turn with the same equation, right? Because the range defense is 3780 and it's much smaller. So it also does more damage per. At only 9220, right? All you need is 5 turns, possibly 4. I'll math out in my head right here. But there's a lot less turns for ground versus ranged. So whenever you have a battlefield and you have somebody holding a tower with ranged and you throw ground at them, all things being equal, it's a bloodbath, ground wins. This is why. Because the ground does a lot more damage, the ranged HP tank is a lot lower, and the actual damage doesn't affect the outcome of the ground's attack damage as much as the defense does for the ranged troop. You understand? So the actual math here, again, thanks to Derrick, I'm able to actually do the exact math, shows you that ground versus siege, for instance, it'd be like somebody in a full tank body armor attacking a naked guy with a pea shooter. It's not going to work. So that's where you find some of the biggest offsetting, rallies, so to speak. So the biggest solos you'll ever get are going to be a ground general like this on the bottom left against a keep that's all ranged and all siege. This guy did heal some of his T13 mount, didn't do much for him though. And those are the biggest bloodbaths. As a matter of fact, my biggest solo was against somebody who was down to, from rallies, down to, we wiped out his mound, we wiped out his ground, right? So first range shot followed by a mount shot to wipe out his ground. And all he was left with was siege and range. And you send a ground troop into that, and it's literally a bloodbath, right? I think these guys are C1. We mostly match C1 nowadays. So in conclusion, so to speak, we get how mount buffing HP works, right? Higher HP, the longer it is before you die, the longer hits you can take. So it really works great on defense, the HP. The attack, obviously, helps to make the attack more potent, helps to take more HP points from the enemy. That's how buffs work there, is making you more deadly. But how does the defense work? How does buffing a defense work? And which troops is it going to help? And that's what these next two charts in summation are going to be. Mount versus ranged, good. It's going to protect the mount troop pretty well. It's going to affect the damage that the ranged troop can do. And it's, again, the ranged troop's real advantage to killing mount is the extrinsic trait, not the intrinsic trait. But the intrinsic defense can help a mounted troop withstand a ranged onslaught. Mount versus mount, very useful, right? Because those are two armies that are identical. The one with the bigger defense is going to weaken the other one's attack and is going to last longer and win that battle. Mount versus siege is useless. You don't need it. That's that 1%, the 99% attack in that earlier example, right? The siege is so weak and pathetic. The mount is so heavy with an attack. All it has to do is sit on it and it's dead. However, right, the siege uses the extrinsic traits to offset it a little bit, but it's not enough, not even close. So defending, putting defense on a mount troop general or buffing them for that, useless. Mount versus ground, not useful. Really not useful. Because the ground attack is so puny and pathetic. That's low attack, high defense example, right? So again, not really worth buffing the mount to go against ground. But again, the two stars that I have there are the ones that it's useful to protect against. And before you guys get there, I'm not going to take you at home for you guys. I want you guys to ask yourself, is it important to buff a mount against range? Is it important to buff a mount against mount? Does that happen a lot? With using the extrinsic video, you should know whether or not those troops are going to be susceptible to each other. And again, it should help you choose, particularly on your wall general, which defenses you're using. Ranged versus ranged. It's got an impact, but it's not really practical, mostly because of the extrinsic traits. Ranged start way back and have very, very slow march speeds. They don't often come into contact with each other unless you're sending a ranged army at a ranged army. Even there, they have to chew through the layers to get to each other. So it's impactful to have a range versus range defense buff, but not practical. It's not going to happen that often. Mount, range versus mount, not useful and worthless for the same reason that mount was really worthless against siege. You don't need it. You use extrinsics to help your range get more deadly. You make sure you have a decent mount layer. You make sure even run a mount army into a ranged rally to run interference like blockers in front of a running back. And that's how that works, is extrinsic for range to protect range, not the other way around. Ranged versus ground, useless, right? That's another example with the ground. That's the one that we did out. It doesn't help. You can defend all you want. It's such a mismatch. It's a bloodbath. And then range versus siege, very useful, right? The siege is that's the example of low defense, low attack. And oftentimes range do run into siege, but it's a 1 out of 4 scenario you're protecting against. So it's a very particular need to have to protect ranged against siege. And I would say, for instance, let's say you're a keep and you neglected your siege build and you have very little siege in your keep to protect against a siege rally. And your range are going to come up under fire first and foremost. Well, here's where a defense buff may actually prevent a lot of those deaths and slow down those attacks and get your ranged and or mount a couple extra turns to close the distance on the siege to kill them, hopefully if they don't have any blockers. Let's go over, so again, it can be useful. Again, is it a great spot to use that defense spot? The limited 8 slots for defense you have on your wall keep? I'm going to let you figure that out on your own. Ground versus mount, useful. Those are melee troop versus melee troop. The ground's HP is so huge and the defense is so big that the buffs may actually help really wear out that mount and not get as many kills and not maybe go as deep on a huge rally on your keep, not so deep on layers. So ground defense, I would say important, useful. Ground versus archer, again, no need. The mismatch is just not really, the archers are like shooting pea shooters at the ground, which is just a tank. Ground versus ground, very useful. And everybody knows that since the double gens came and ever since they neutered the civilization treasures that debuffed ground attack, that ground's become much more relevant since then. So you're seeing a lot of people hit ground with ground. That defensive buff is going to come into play in those matchups big time. Because ground's attack is low, it's the third lowest, it's behind ranged and mount, and their defense is so huge. So oftentimes that battle is going to be determined not by the ground attack buff, so to speak, but more about the defense and HP buffs. And ground versus siege, again, completely unnecessary. That last attack should have showed you what that was. And then lastly, let's get to siege. Siege versus mount, completely useless. Siege versus ground, completely useless. Siege versus archer, completely useless. But, and I put 2 stars here, siege versus siege, very useful. Well, when you get past 20 billion in power, and a lot of you are nowadays if you look at, all-stars, nobody's really stupid enough to try to solo you. A 20 billion keep really is going to have no trouble taking on a solo attack from any K40 with any max buffs, really, if you're built right. So you don't really have to worry about Mount, Ground, and Archer. Really, the only thing they can attack you with is Siege. So the Ultra Titans, the guys over 20 billion, the guys over 30 billion, it makes sense to build a Siege defense because it'll help you withstand, and it's much more impactful. Again, that last example on the earlier of the 50%, right, where it's really kind of even and the buff's going to make a big play on the number. It makes sense to have siege defense. And again, whether it's flat, whether it's percentages, is whether you intend on letting it really play out in the lower layers or playing out in the higher layers. So, and whether or not you're going to be debuffed or not debuffed. Remember, rallies don't bring their subgens, so they don't bring debuffs with them. So it's important to really understand that defense, the X factor that a lot of people aren't paying attention to, a generalization I have found is defense works better against ranged attacks, as in archer or siege, particularly for archer or siege. And it works well for melee troops against melee troops, like and like. And whenever things are equal, they tend to be the equalizer that will really be the difference maker in a battle. So, again, it depends on what your build is. It depends on what your power size is. Because as a rally runner in battlefields, I'll tell you right now, I don't scout you. I look at your power and I know exactly which rally I'm going to send. And if you fall into range for X kind of troop that I'm going to send at you, you probably want to build your defense around that. And then as you shed that number and you start to grow into the bigger sizes, now you have to worry about defending about a different troop. That's the difference about building defenses. What works for me at 33 billion is not going to work for a guy at 2 billion. What's not going to work with all these other people. So it's important for you guys to understand that. You guys have to understand that it's really, really important that you guys make this game your own. Do not look to me for answers to tell you that this is the right build. I know the right build for me. You should know the right build for you, and we are not the same. What I would love to see, what my dream is for EVONY, is that at some point, eventually, Battlefields and All-Stars will be 19 different guys running 19 different builds. One guy siege ranged, one guy ranged ground, one guy mount siege, and you kind of see how it plays out and what you have to throw at them, especially at the bigger sizes. That's one of the things I love about this game. Anyway, so that's my talk on intrinsic traits. If you guys have questions, again, always feel free to hit me up. I'm going to try my best to link Derrick's video in the comments in the description. Again, if you have any questions, keep them coming. I do appreciate all you guys. You guys have been really awesome with the feedback. Thanks, guys.